He's comfortable, Rose. Comfortable isn't a marriage, it's a mortgage with a ring on it.
On a quiet Tuesday morning in Richmond, Virginia, a man named Richard Coleman opened a manila folder on his kitchen table, and in doing so, ended a 14-year marriage without ever raising his voice. What his wife did not know, as she sat down across from him, was that the folder in front of her had been 3 weeks in the making, built one photograph, one bank record, one recording at a time, by a man everyone in her life had always described the same way. Steady. Quiet. The kind of man who never made a scene. She was about to learn that quiet men are not the same as blind men, and that the ones who say the least are often the ones who have seen the most. To understand what happened in that kitchen, you first have to understand the life that came before it. Richard Coleman was 47 years old, a contractor who had built his business from a single pickup truck and a toolbox that once belonged to his father. He was not a wealthy man by the standards of the neighborhoods he sometimes worked in, but he was a solid one, the kind of solid that takes 12 years of early mornings and honest bids to build. His wife, Rose, was 44, sharp and capable, the founder of a small event styling business that had started in their garage and slowly become something real. To everyone who knew them, they looked like a couple who had figured something out that a lot of people never do. What almost none of those people knew was that, for well over a year, Rose had been quietly building a second life alongside the one she shared with her husband, and that she had already begun making plans for the day she would no longer need the first one. The unraveling began, as these things often do, with something small enough to explain away. In the spring, Rose started taking client meetings later into the evening, sometimes not returning until well past 9. Richard told himself the business was simply growing, and growth, he reasoned, was supposed to be inconvenient. In early summer, she replaced her phone and set it up herself, refusing his help, telling him she wanted a fresh start with her organization system. He believed her, the way people believe the ones they trust by default, without needing evidence, simply because doubting them had never occurred to him before. By late summer, the easy conversations they used to share at the end of a long day had grown shorter, thinner, more guarded, and her phone had developed a habit of landing face down on the counter the moment he walked into a room. He noticed every one of these changes as they happened. He simply chose, again and again, to explain each one as something smaller than it actually was. The moment that changed everything happened in October, at a wedding neither of them expected to matter. Rose's cousin was married at a church downtown, and Rose, who had a gift for making any room feel considered, spent most of the evening moving between tables, half guest and half unofficial coordinator. Richard stepped outside for air near a side entrance, away from the noise of the reception, when he heard her voice drifting through an open door. She was talking to her closest friend, a woman named Tasha, and she did not know anyone was listening. "He's comfortable," Tasha said, not unkindly, almost gently, like she had said it before. "Comfortable isn't a marriage. It's a mortgage with a ring on it." And Rose, after a pause that told Richard more than any word could have, said, "I know what I have with him. It's stable. It's safe. It's just not what I have with Damon." Richard did not move. He did not walk through that door and demand an explanation, though every instinct in him wanted to. He recognized the name Damon immediately, a vendor Rose had been working with for nearly a year, a man with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that made rooms lean toward him. Rose continued, telling Tasha that Damon made her feel like she was still becoming someone, while Richard, in her words, had already decided who she was to him a long time ago. Tasha tried, one more time, to talk her out of whatever she was building. Rose's answer was 4 words, delivered without hesitation. "Stay out of this one." Richard walked back to his table before she returned, sat down, and when she came back flushed and smiling, asking if he had tried the shrimp, he told her yes, it was good. He said nothing else that night, not out of fear, but because some part of him already understood that a partial confrontation would only hand her the chance to explain it all away, and he had already spent a year letting things be explained away. What Rose did not know was that 3 weeks before that wedding, Richard had already been meeting with an attorney named Gerald Hayes, for reasons that had nothing to do with her at all. His father had left him a modest trust, and Virginia law required a formal review before the property could transfer fully into his name. It was routine paperwork, nothing more, until the night after the wedding, when Richard called Gerald back with a very different question. He wanted to know what it would actually take to document a pattern of behavior, financial and personal, in a way that would hold up if it ever needed to. Gerald did not ask him why. He simply told him to document everything that crossed his path naturally, to never go looking, never remove anything, but to write down and photograph whatever he happened to find. That night, Richard opened his father's old notebook, the one with the cracked blue cover his father once used to log job estimates, and began a new section in the back. Dates, times, what he had heard. Nothing dramatic, just the truth, written in his own hand, exactly as it happened. 3 weeks later, Rose flew to Charlotte for what she described as a 2-day vendor conference. Richard drove her to the airport himself and kissed her goodbye at the curb. The next afternoon, needing a charger cable, he walked out to her studio in the garage and found an old laptop sitting on her desk. The same laptop she had told him months earlier no longer worked. It powered on the moment he touched it. Inside a folder labeled simply as private, he found a year of messages between Rose and Damon, some professional, most of them not. One exchange, sent 4 months earlier, stayed with him longer than the rest. Damon had written, asking what stable even meant to her at this point. Rose's reply was direct. It meant not walking into a divorce broke. She had seen what happened to women who left with nothing, and she did not intend to be one of them. Further down, he found the message from Tasha he had already half expected, a warning sent nearly a year earlier, telling Rose that Richard had never been anything but good to her, and that if her mother ever found out, she would never forgive her. Rose's answer, sent 4 minutes later, was the same 4 words from the wedding. Stay out of this one. He photographed every screen exactly as Gerald had instructed, closed the laptop, and returned it to the desk at the precise angle he had found it. 2 days later, Rose came home from Charlotte tan and animated, describing a conference that Richard now understood had only ever been half true. He made dinner. He asked about her trip, and she answered in the kind of convincing detail that only comes from a story rehearsed enough times to feel like memory. He told her he was glad she was home, and in some old and tired and still honest way, he meant it. That weekend, while she was out, he searched the nightstand on her side of the bed and found, beneath a jewelry box he had given her years earlier, a manila envelope containing a printed copy of his father's trust documents, the surviving spouse clause highlighted in yellow, annotated in the margins in her own handwriting. She had already been thinking about the house, about what she stood to walk away with, long before she had said a single honest word to him about any of it. He photographed it, returned it exactly as he found it, and sat alone in his truck in an empty parking lot for nearly 20 minutes before he could bring himself to drive home. He sat with everything he now knew for 11 more days before saying a word, not out of fear, but because he wanted to be certain that nothing she said could talk her way around what he had. On a Tuesday evening, he laid it all out on the kitchen table. Bank records showing $19,000 quietly moved out of their joint savings over 14 months. A hotel receipt from Charlotte dated the same days she claimed to be at a conference. The printed exchange with Tasha. A photograph of the highlighted trust clause. Rose sat across from him and folded her hands the way she always did when she wanted to appear composed, a gesture Richard had once mistaken for confidence and now understood as something closer to performance. He did not raise his voice. He simply told her he had heard everything at the wedding, and that 3 weeks later he had found the rest of it himself. The color drained slowly from her face. When she finally spoke, it was not to explain, but to ask quietly in a voice smaller than he had heard from her in years, whether he had ever wanted her to stay. He told her the truth. He had wanted the woman he married to stay, but that woman and the plan she had been running for over a year were not the same person, and he suspected she had known that longer than he had. He told her his attorney would be filing for separation that week, and for the first time in 14 years, he slept in another room of his own house. In the weeks that followed, something happened that Richard had never experienced before and did not yet have a name for. Rose became warm, almost convincingly so. She cooked meals she had not made in years. She reached for his arm in the hallway. She asked about his day with the kind of attentiveness she had abandoned months earlier. It looked, for a moment, like remorse, and it very nearly felt like one. But it was not a change of heart. It was the last tool available to a person who could feel the ground shifting beneath her, and had nothing left to hold it steady but charm. Richard stayed kind. He stayed present in the house, because the year of separation required by Virginia law had to run its full course regardless of what either of them felt in the meantime. But he never told her that the filing had already happened, because a man who has already made his decision does not need to announce it. He simply keeps moving, quietly, the way he always has. 10 months into that year, Rose held the official launch of her business's expansion, a real studio space downtown, and she invited everyone who mattered to her, including her mother, a composed and formidable woman named Odessa who had raised 3 children largely on her own, and whose approval had always meant something in that family. She invited Richard, too, because to the outside world they were still, as far as anyone knew, a couple weathering a difficult season. He said he would come, and he did. The space was beautiful, warmly lit, filled with nearly 80 guests, vendors, and clients. Damon was there, working the room in a gray suit with the easy confidence of a man who believed the evening belonged entirely to him. Rose spoke for almost 10 minutes about vision and years of preparation, and the applause that followed was genuine. When she opened the floor for a few words from family, she found Richard in the crowd and waved him forward without a trace of hesitation, because she had every reason to believe he was still exactly who he had always been, steady, dependable, the one who never made a scene. He walked to the front of the room, thanked everyone for coming, and said there was something the people gathered there deserved to hear directly from him before they invested any further trust, money, or belief in what was being built in that room. Then he played a recording, not from the wedding, but from a phone call captured only weeks earlier, in which Rose, believing she was speaking privately to Damon, said that once the business had a year of real revenue behind it, she intended to file, and that she already had paperwork prepared to challenge his father's trust, because a stretch was still worth trying if something eventually gave. The room went completely still. Then Odessa rose from her seat in the second row, straightened her jacket, looked at her daughter across the length of that space, and told her, without raising her voice even slightly, that from that night forward she was no longer welcome to use her name in anything she built. She picked up her handbag and walked out, and the rest of the room understood exactly what that meant. Within minutes, 2 vendors quietly left. Damon was already moving toward the exit, the easy smile gone from his face entirely. The business closed within 5 months. The vendors who left that night never reconsidered. Damon lost a contract he had been counting on, not because Richard arranged it, but because consequences, left alone, tend to find their own level eventually. 4 days after the launch, exactly as Gerald had predicted, Rose's attorney filed a motion challenging the trust, a motion built on the very documents Richard had photographed weeks earlier in that drawer. It was denied within 6 weeks. Odessa never spoke to her daughter about the business again. Tasha came to Richard's door one afternoon that spring, apologized for the silence she had kept for over a year, and told him she was sorry. He told her he appreciated her honesty, and that he meant it, but that he was done looking backward. That same spring, he finished restoring his father's old truck, the project he had returned to quietly through all of it, and stood in his driveway one clear morning with a cup of coffee, looking at something whole that he alone had put back together, piece by piece, exactly the way he had put himself back together in the process. What this story leaves behind is not a lesson about revenge, because Richard never sought any. It is a reminder that the quietest people in a room are often the ones paying the closest attention, and that patience, applied with enough care, tends to reveal the truth far more completely than anger ever could. A man who says little and notices everything is not a man to be underestimated, and the people who mistake his silence for blindness are usually the ones who end up most surprised by what he already knew all along. Here's what this whole thing taught me, and I want to leave you with it plainly. A good man isn't someone who never gets fooled. He's someone who, when the truth finally surfaces, doesn't become the worst version of himself because of it. He doesn't perform his pain for an audience. He doesn't chase consequences he doesn't need to control. He goes back to the garage. He finishes what he started. He shows up for the people who are still counting on him. If there's a man like that in your life, steady, never needing credit for it, tell him this week. Not in a card, in person or on the phone or across a kitchen table. Tell him plainly, I see how you carry yourself. I see what it costs, and I'm proud of you. Those words cost nothing, and they're worth everything. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.